So, reflecting on the October Revolution in Central Asia, it was really catastrophic for an event that at first seemed so distant and so irrelevant. Between the war, revolution, and civil war, the region lost half of its agricultural land in some parts of it, and around 2 million people, about a quarter of the population. Local elites really lacked the political resources, the organizational capacity, and the political appeal necessary to counter the communists, who thoroughly controlled Central Asia by 1923. The new communist imperial structures began to press for regional unity. They pressed for a common economic policy, a local constitution that ensured that foreign policy and military affairs and external trade relations were regulated by Moscow. And this sparked resistance. The resistance came from a group called the Basmachi. These were considered heroes among the peasants, the Basmachi. And I don't have it written down here, I already mentioned it before. Basmachi, Basmachi. They were considered heroes among the peasants, but the Bolsheviks undermined the popular support by making life more tolerable. So they stopped requisitioning grain, they returned mosque property, they amnestied former enemies, and thanks to this, the Bolsheviks became relatively benign, and this really took away from the popular support for the Basmachi. You still had a small guerrilla force. It was often bandit based all around Central Asia in the form of the Basmachis. They even took control of the Fergana Valley for a period in 1919. Really, the Kokand massacre, a massacre in Kokand where 10 to 15,000 people were killed at the end of 1917, was a major impetus for the Basmachis. And they become large, but they're still an unorganized movement. They're diverse in their goals. So again, they're heroes among the peasants because it's locals standing up to a very foreign proletariat revolution. And they ended up controlling significant amounts of territory. This includes Samarkand, Dushanbe by the early 1920s. But the Basmachis are really, again, as a result of the Bolshevik policies, and the Bolshevik policies are interesting because they do exactly what the Marxists said the bourgeois liberals were doing, dropping crumbs. So they drop a bunch of crumbs on the population, and the population is less excited to go out and support the Basmachis. The Basmachis are more or less gone by the mid-1920s, but they still flare up on and off again well into the 1930s. They just never regain the strength of the earlier years. And this is what I meant to show you while I was talking about all that. There we go again. So the Basmachi are these bandits or guerrillas that unified in opposition to the Russians. They were popular among the peasantry, but not for very long because the Bolsheviks weakened them with the tools of the bourgeoisie, as I just mentioned. So that's the end of the slides. Again, it's important to keep in mind that there were 3 revolutions. Let me just get back into the slides just so it looks prettier. There were 3 revolutions in Russia in 1917. You had 3 revolutions in 1905 and 1917, 2 in 1917, and 1 in 1905. But for Central Asians, really things didn't change very much, or not to the extent that they expected. Between 1918 and 1922, the Russian Bolsheviks struggled to transform Central Asia, but all this happened while they were embroiled in a civil war. They eventually conquered Kokand through military coercion. They conquered Bukhara primarily by military coercion, and Khiva through diplomatic, economic, and also a measure of military coercion. So by 1920, they've really run over the Emirates, and that's when we can start talking about the advent of these republics within a couple years, which we'll talk about in the next class.